April 17, 1953. Hill 255, Korea 0347 hours. Private First Class Batu. Bird Bobby Henderson sits in the pre-dawn darkness, hunched against the sandbag wall of his fighting position. His breath forms small clouds in the freezing air. The 18-year-old farm boy from Nebraska hasn't slept in 36 hours. Around him, 200 exhausted soldiers from Easy Company. 31st Infantry Regiment man a defensive line that's barely held together by barbed wire in prayer. For the past week, Chinese forces have been probing their positions with increasing aggression. Tonight, the hill has gone eerily quiet. Too quiet. Henderson's M1 Garand is clogged with mud from yesterday's mortar barrage. Against regulations, he decides to clean it now. His platoon sergeant is making rounds on the other end of the line. In the darkness, his cold fingers work the rifle's mechanism. What he doesn't know is that 300 yards down the slope, a full battalion of People's Volunteer Army soldiers lies in perfect silence, waiting for the signal to attack at 0400 hours. Exactly 13 minutes away, Henderson pulls the operating rod. Click. He checks the chamber. His finger finds the trigger as he peers down the barrel. Then it happens. The rifle fires. The single shot cracks across the silent hillside like a thunderclap. Immediately, traces erupt from the darkness below. Chinese whistles shriek. Henderson drops flat as bullets snap over his head. Within seconds, the entire hillside explodes into flame. Flares burst overhead, transforming night into hellish daylight. What he sees makes his blood freeze. Wave after wave of enemy soldiers charging up the slope. Hundreds of them screaming, blowing bugles, firing as they run. Incoming, someone screams. The American artillery responds, but it's chaos. The attack wasn't supposed to start for another 13 minutes. Chinese commanders thought Henderson's shot was their own signal flare. They launched early before their mortar teams were in position, before their support elements were ready, before the carefully synchronized attack plan was fully implemented. That one accidental discharge, a split-second mistake by a kid who should have been finishing high school, just triggered a battle that will rage for 3 days, cost over 1,500 lives, and become a turning point in the Korean War's final months. What Bobby Henderson didn't know was that his incredible stroke of luck would save his entire company from annihilation. To understand why one accidental shot mattered so much, you have to understand Hill 255, later nicknamed Pork Chop Hill by the men who fought there. By April 1953, the Korean War had devolved into brutal stalemate. Armistice talks dragged on at Panmunjom while both sides fought vicious battles for insignificant hills, each trying to gain leverage at the negotiating table. These weren't strategic objectives. They were bargaining chips measured in blood. Hill 25 jutted from the barren landscape like a rotten tooth. Bare slopes offering zero cover, crowned by a small plateau barely large enough for 2 rifle companies. The Chinese wanted it for one reason: proximity. From its summit, their artillery observers could direct fire on the main American defensive line 3 miles behind it. For 3 weeks, U.S. commanders had watched enemy activity increase in the valleys around Hill 255. Night reconnaissance patrols reported fresh trenches, supply dumps, and troop concentrations. Intelligence officers warned that a major attack was imminent. The question wasn't if, but when. The problem: Easy Company was under strength, undermanned, and exhausted. They'd been in continuous combat for 43 days. Replacements were green recruits like Bobby Henderson, who'd arrived in Korea just 6 weeks earlier. The company commander, Captain James Morrison, had requested reinforcements, but division headquarters were stretched thin across a 100-mile front. Morrison's defensive plan relied on one critical factor: early warning. If the Chinese attacked, American artillery would have time to establish fire zones, call in air support, and maneuver reserve units into position. His forward listening posts were equipped with sound-powered telephones connected directly to the fire direction center. The protocol was clear. At first contact, call it in, fall back to the main line, and let the artillery tear apart the attacking formation before it reached the trenches. But defensive plans, no matter how carefully crafted, require time to implement. The difference between survival and slaughter often comes down to minutes. On the night of April 16, Chinese commanders of the 141st Regiment finalized their assault plan. The attack would begin at exactly 400 hours with a coordinated mortar barrage. Under that covering fire, 3 assault companies would rush the hill from 3 directions simultaneously. Engineers would use Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps in the wire. Flamethrower teams would clear bunkers. Behind them, reserve companies would exploit the breakthrough. Intelligence predicted American response time at 6 to 8 minutes. Enough time to overrun the position before artillery could be effectively targeted. The Chinese plan was methodical, rehearsed, and based on 3 previous successful assaults against similar positions. They'd studied American defensive patterns, radio frequencies, and response times. They'd even accounted for casualties. They expected to lose 200 men taking the hill, but they'd have it. What no Chinese officer anticipated was that their attack would launch 13 minutes early, triggered by a private who wasn't supposed to have a loaded rifle. Those 13 minutes represented 780 seconds of advantage in infantry combat. That's an eternity. When Henderson's rifle fired, the Chinese battalion commander made a split-second decision. He assumed one of his forward units had jumped the gun or that they'd been discovered. Either way, surprise was blown. He gave the signal to attack immediately rather than abort and rescue. His assault companies surged forward, but his mortar teams weren't ready. His flamethrower units were still moving into position. His Bangalore torpedo crews hadn't reached the wire. The careful synchronization that made the plan work had just fallen apart. Meanwhile, on Hill 255, Captain Morrison's defenders had those precious 13 minutes that shouldn't have existed. 13 minutes to man their positions, to call in fire missions, to prepare for what was coming up that hill. The battle that followed would prove that in war, luck matters as much as skill, and sometimes an accident changes everything. Robert Henderson had no business being in a combat zone. At 18 years old, he graduated high school the previous spring with a C average and vague plans to work on his father's farm. When his draft notice arrived in November 1952, his mother cried for 3 days. His father shook his hand and told him to keep his head down. Neither mentioned that Bobby's older brother had died at Incan 2 years earlier. Henderson arrived at Fort Riley, Kansas in December. Basic training was 8 weeks of misery, push-ups, rifle drill, marching, and drill sergeants who called him farm boy with sneering contempt. He qualified as marksman with the M1 Garand, the lowest passing score, his company commander noted in his file. Adequate physical conditioning, below average initiative, not leadership material. After infantry training, they gave him 2 weeks leave. He spent it helping his father repair fences and trying not to think about where he was going. His girlfriend Jenny promised to wait for him. Her letters would stop coming 3 months later. Henderson shipped out to Korea in February 1953, arriving at the Busan replacement depot with 200 other scared kids. A grizzled sergeant looked them over and said, "Most of you won't see your 19th birthday. Welcome to Korea." He was assigned to Easy Company, 31st Infantry Regiment, which was holding positions along a barren stretch of hills near the 38th parallel. The men he joined were exhausted veterans who'd been in country for months. They'd survived Chinese human wave attacks, sub-zero winters, and the grinding monotony of trench warfare. They looked at replacements like Henderson with a mixture of pity and contempt. Replacements were called FNGs, new guys, and were expected to keep quiet, follow orders, and try not to get anyone killed. Henderson's first week on the line, he threw up from fear during a mortar attack. His second week, he accidentally dropped a grenade during drill, causing his entire squad to dive for cover. The grenade was a dummy, but the humiliation wasn't. His squad leader, Sergeant Mike Kowalski, told him bluntly, "You're going to get yourself killed, farm boy. Maybe take some of us with you." By mid-April, Henderson had settled into the grinding routine of the defensive positions. 4 hours on watch, 4 hours off. Endless digging, filling sandbags, stringing wire, cleaning weapons, and waiting for an attack everyone knew was coming. He wrote letters home describing the landscape. Barren, the food, terrible, and the cold, unbearable. He didn't mention the bodies they'd found in the wire some mornings or the screams from the Chinese propaganda speakers promising death to American imperialists. On the night of April 16, Henderson pulled guard duty from 0200 to 600 hours. His position was Bunker 7 on the northeastern edge of the defensive perimeter. His job was simple. Watch the darkness, report movement, and don't fall asleep. He had no special training in combat tactics, no expertise in defensive operations, no understanding of the larger strategic picture. He was just a scared kid with a dirty rifle trying to survive until morning. At 0330 hours, Henderson sits alone in his fighting position, watching darkness and fighting exhaustion. His relief is supposed to arrive in 30 minutes. His M1 Garand leans against the sandbag wall and it's filthy. The previous day's mortar barrage kicked up clouds of dirt and dust. Korean dust is unlike anything Henderson experienced in Nebraska. It's fine as flour and gets into everything. His rifle's operating rod is gritty. The bolt won't close smoothly. He knows from training that a fouled rifle jams at the worst possible moment. Henderson glances around. Sergeant Kowalski is 50 yards away checking other positions. The lieutenant is back at the command post. Nobody's watching. Army regulations are absolutely clear. You never ever clean a weapon while on combat watch. You never have a loaded rifle apart. The risk of accidental discharge is too high and the noise could trigger a firefight. If you need to clean your weapon, you report it. Get relieved from your position and do it in the rear area under supervision. But Henderson is 18, exhausted, and not thinking clearly. He's also scared that his rifle won't work if they get hit. In his mind, cleaning it now makes sense. He pulls his rifle maintenance kit from his pack, a small metal can of CLP oil, a bore brush, and cleaning patches. He ejects the clip. 8 rounds clatter into his palm and sets them on the sandbag beside him. He pulls the operating rod back and visually checks the chamber. Empty, or so he thinks. What Henderson doesn't know is that Korean winters wreak havoc on M1 mechanisms. When temperatures fluctuate between freezing nights and warmer days, condensation forms inside the receiver. That moisture combines with dust to create a gummy residue that can trap rounds. There's still a round chambered. Henderson just can't see it in the darkness. He works the bolt several times, trying to clear the grit. The mechanism is stiff. He peers down the barrel, holding the rifle at an angle to catch ambient light. His finger rests on the trigger, steadying the weapon. The stuck round suddenly breaks free. The firing pin drops. The rifle fires with a deafening crack that shatters the silence. For one frozen heartbeat, everything stops. Then all hell breaks loose. Traces rip across the hillside from the darkness below. Chinese whistles pierce the air. Shrill warbling signals that make Henderson's blood turn to ice. Voices scream orders in a language he doesn't understand. Then he sees them. Shadows materializing from the darkness. Dozens, hundreds, charging up the slope directly at his position. Incoming. Someone screams down the line. Henderson drops flat as bullets snap through the air where his head just was. His rifle lies in the dirt where he dropped it. His mind is blank with terror. 50 yards away, Sergeant Kowalski keys his radio handset and screams, "Contact! Contact battalion strength attack on our perimeter. Request immediate fire support." The battle for Hill 255 has begun, 13 minutes ahead of schedule. And Bobby Henderson, the kid from Nebraska who couldn't pass marksmanship with better than minimum scores, just accidentally saved his entire company. Captain Morrison is drinking instant coffee when his radio explodes with Kowalski's voice. He's on his feet instantly running for the command bunker. All units, stand to. Stand to. This is not a drill. Along the perimeter, men roll out of sleeping bags and grab weapons. Flares burst overhead, bathing the hillside in wavering yellow light. What they see is nightmare fuel. Hundreds of Chinese soldiers charging up the slope in 3 separate columns, bayonets fixed, screaming as they come. But something's wrong with the attack. Staff Sergeant William Bull Palmer, a veteran who survived 2 Chinese assaults, immediately notices it. They're out of sequence, he shouts to Morrison over the radio. No more to prep, no Bangalore torpedoes on the wire. He's right. The Chinese soldiers are hitting the American defensive wire at full sprint, but nobody's blown gaps in it. Men tangle in the coils of concertina wire, struggling, dying as American machine guns open up. The assault that should have been a coordinated breakthrough has become a massacre. At Fire Direction Center 3 miles behind the line, Henderson's accidental shot has triggered a cascade of responses that wouldn't have been possible if the attack had launched as planned. Artillery Officer Lieutenant David Chen, who was monitoring radio traffic, had his fire missions plotted and ready within 90 seconds. Pre-registered defensive fire zones, coordinates already calculated, guns already aimed, start dropping high explosive rounds into the valleys below Hill 255. But the real advantage is time. At Zoo 349 hours, 4 minutes after Henderson shot the first American, artillery shells impact the Chinese assembly areas. These are troops who should have been on the hill already overrunning bunkers. Instead, they're caught in the open waiting to advance. The carnage is horrific. At 0352 hours, Morrison has his complete defensive plan activated. Machine gun teams are firing interlocking fields of fire. Mortar crews are dropping illumination rounds that turn night into day. Rifle squads are moving into prepared fallback positions. At 0356 hours, 2 F-86 Sabre jets from Kimpo Air Base scream over the hill at treetop level. They weren't supposed to be in the air at 400. They were scheduled for a dawn patrol, but the early alert gave Air Force controllers time to divert them. Their napalm canisters tumble into the Chinese advance, creating walls of flame. The Chinese battalion commander, Colonel Jiang Wei, realizes with sick horror what's happened. His meticulously planned assault has disintegrated. His mortar teams are still trying to set up when they should be providing covering fire. His Bangalore torpedo engineers are caught in the open by artillery. His reserve companies are taking casualties before they've even engaged. Still, Jiang presses the attack. He has no choice. The political officers from division headquarters are watching. Failure means disgrace, possibly execution. He orders his bugler to sound the advance again. At 0408 hours, the first Chinese soldiers breach the American line on the northwestern corner of the perimeter. They're crack assault troops from Jiang's best company, and they fight with desperate courage. Sergeant Kowalski's squad meets them in hand-to-hand combat. Private Henderson, who's finally retrieved his rifle, fires blindly into the darkness. He'll never know if he hit anyone. The breakthrough threatens to collapse the entire defense. Morrison commits his reserve platoon. 30 men he'd been holding back for exactly this moment. They counterattack with grenades and bayonets, sealing the breach at brutal cost. The platoon leader, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, is killed by a burst of submachine gun fire. 7 of his men die beside him, but they hold the line. By 05 hours, the Chinese attack stalls. Xiang has committed all his reserves and has nothing left. His casualties are catastrophic. Over 300 dead and wounded, far exceeding the planned losses. American defensive fire is too intense, too well coordinated. He orders retreat. As dawn breaks over Hill 255, the slopes are carpeted with bodies. American medics move through the carnage, finding wounded Chinese soldiers alongside their own casualties. The smell of cordite and blood hangs in the cold morning air. If you're learning about the real stories behind famous battles, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss these incredible true war stories. Hit that subscribe button now. Captain Morrison stands at his command post surveying the battlefield. His company has held barely. He's lost 19 men killed and 47 wounded, almost a third of his effective strength. But they are still here. Find out who fired that first shot, he tells his operations sergeant. 2 hours after the battle, military intelligence officers arrive at Hill 25 with unusual urgency. They're looking for something specific. Captured documents, prisoners, anything that might explain why the Chinese attacked so chaotically. What they find changes everything. Among the Chinese dead is a company commander carrying a detailed assault plan, complete operational orders that should have been destroyed before the attack. The document reveals not just the plan for Hill 255, but the entire Chinese spring offensive strategy. Intelligence analysts will later call it one of the most valuable documents captured during the entire war. But the real intelligence coup comes from interrogating prisoners. 23 Chinese soldiers were captured during the battle, including a battalion political officer. Under questioning, he reveals something extraordinary. The attack was supposed to begin at exactly 0400 hours, synchronized with 5 other assaults along a 30-mile front. Henderson's accidental shot at 80,347 hours triggered a premature attack that threw off the entire operation. The intelligence officer conducting the interrogation, Captain Edward Martinez, can barely believe what he's hearing. One accidental shot disrupted a coordinated divisional offensive. The political officer, nursing a shrapnel wound, nods bitterly. Your soldier's mistake was our disaster. Our commander thought the gunshot was our signal. He launched early. Everything fell apart. Martinez files an urgent report that goes straight to 8th Army headquarters. Within hours, American forces along the entire front are on alert. When the Chinese launched their coordinated attacks at dawn the next morning, now 12 hours behind schedule, they face prepared defenses. What should have been a devastating surprise offensive becomes a series of costly failures. The casualty numbers tell the story. Along the entire front, Chinese forces lose over 4,000 men killed and 8,000 wounded in 72 hours of failed attacks. American losses, 312 killed, 940 wounded. It's a lopsided defensive victory that will influence the final armistice negotiations. And it all traces back to Private Bobby Henderson cleaning his rifle at the wrong moment. On April 19, Henderson is summoned to Captain Morrison's command post. He approaches, expecting punishment, possibly a court-martial for violating weapons handling protocols. Instead, he finds Morrison with 2 full colonels from division headquarters. Private Henderson, Morrison begins, I need you to walk me through exactly what happened 2 nights ago. Start with why you were cleaning your weapon. Henderson's throat is dry. Sir, my rifle was fouled. I thought I know what you thought, Private. What I need to know is the exact timing. When did you fire? Around 0347, sir. Maybe 0348. One of the colonels leans forward. You're certain of the time? Yes, sir. I checked my watch right after. I thought I'd be in trouble for the noise. The colonels exchange glances. The senior one, Colonel William Jameson, speaks carefully. Private, your accidental discharge may have saved this entire sector. The Chinese attack was scheduled for 0400. Your shot triggered it early before they were ready. That gave us time to prepare. Time that saved hundreds of lives. Henderson stares at him uncomprehending. Morrison explains, the intelligence we captured shows their plan was meticulous. If they'd executed it as scheduled, we probably would have been overrun. But you threw them off balance. That 13-minute window made all the difference. So, I'm not in trouble, sir. Oh, you're definitely in trouble, Morrison says with a slight smile. You violated every protocol in the book. You'll be written up and there will be extra duty, but you're also going to be cited in dispatches for your actions during the assault. Sergeant Kowalski says you fought well once the shooting started. The colonels leave and Henderson returns to his position in a daze. His squad mates treat him differently now. Not exactly as a hero, but no longer as the useless FNG. Sergeant Kowalski claps him on the shoulder. Dumbest lucky bastard I ever met, farm boy. Over the next 2 months, the full impact becomes clear. The captured intelligence helps American forces anticipate and counter multiple Chinese offensives. The Battle of Hill 255, as it becomes known in official reports, is studied at Fort Benning as an example of successful defensive operations under surprise attack conditions. The Chinese records tell another story. Colonel Jiang Wei survives the battle, but is relieved of command for launching prematurely. In his official report to division headquarters, he writes, the American soldier's rifle discharge at 0347 hours was initially assessed as our own signal. This interpretation error resulted in premature assault execution, compromising tactical surprise and operational coordination. CTA number 2. These are the stories they don't teach in history class. Real soldiers, real battles, real consequences. If you want more incredible true war stories, hit that like button and check out our playlist of forgotten heroes. Your support helps us bring these stories to light. On July 27, 1953, the Korean armistice is signed at Panmunjom. The fighting stops after 3 years of brutal stalemate. Hill 255 remains in American hands, one of hundreds of meaningless hills that thousands of men died fighting for. Private Henderson is promoted to Private First Class and receives a Bronze Star, not for his accidental shot, but for his actions during the hand-to-hand fighting when the Chinese breached the perimeter. The citation doesn't mention that he was mostly terrified and firing blindly into the darkness. He rotates home in August 1953, returns to Nebraska, and tries to forget Korea. He rarely talks about the war. When fellow veterans ask if he saw action, he says yes and changes the subject. Years later, during the Korean War studies conducted at the U.S. Army War College, Hill 25 becomes a minor footnote in the larger narrative of the war's final battles. Military historians note the intelligence capture and the defensive success, but they never identify Henderson by name. The official history records, enemy attack launched prematurely due to unknown factors resulting in tactical advantage for defending forces. Unknown factors. Sometimes history turns on those unknown factors. A young private, a dirty rifle. A moment of poor judgment that somehow becomes blind luck. Robert Henderson never told anyone he accidentally triggered a major battle. After his discharge in September 1953, he returned to his father's farm in Nebraska and tried to forget Korea. The nightmares came regularly, not of the fighting, but of that frozen moment when his rifle fired and the world exploded. He'd wake up sweating, hearing Chinese bugles and Sergeant Kowalski screaming into the radio. He married Jenny after all. She'd stopped writing, but was waiting when he came home. They had 3 children. He worked the farm for 40 years. He attended VFW meetings occasionally, but sat quietly in the back. When people asked about his Bronze Star, he'd say, "Just did my job." And changed the subject. In 1987, a military historian researching the Korean War's final battles contacted Henderson. The historian had obtained declassified Chinese documents through Freedom of Information Act requests. Colonel Jiang Wei's after-action report to specifically mention premature triggering by American rifle fire at 037 hours. "Mr. Henderson," the historian asked during their phone interview, "were you the soldier who fired that shot?" Henderson was silent for a long moment. "Yeah, that was me. I was cleaning my rifle when I shouldn't have been." Stupid mistake. That stupid mistake probably saved 200 American lives and disrupted a major enemy offensive. Did you know that? Captain Morrison told me something like that. I never really believed it. I was just a scared kid who didn't follow regulations. History is full of scared kids who didn't follow regulations. Some of them changed the world. Henderson's story was eventually included in a 1989 book about forgotten heroes of the Korean War. The book sold modestly. Henderson received a few letters from other veterans who'd served in Korea. One letter was from a man who'd been in Baker Company on Hill 255 that night. It read simply, "Because of you, I came home. Thank you." Henderson kept that letter in his desk drawer until he died in 2003 at age 68. Today, Hill 255 is part of the Korean Demilitarized Zone, a barren hilltop in the most heavily fortified border in the world. South Korean soldiers man positions there, watching north across the same terrain that Bobby Henderson defended 70 years ago. The bunkers are different now, concrete and steel, instead of sandbags and logs. But the mission is identical. Watch, wait, and prepare for an attack that may never come. The lesson of Bobby Henderson's story isn't about heroism or tactical brilliance. It's about chaos, luck, and the razor-thin margins that separate victory from disaster in combat. It's about how wars are won not just by brilliant generals and careful planning, but by exhausted teenagers making split-second decisions that ripple through history in ways they'll never understand. Sometimes the difference between catastrophe and triumph is 13 minutes. Sometimes history turns on an accidental shot fired by a kid who just wanted to go home. And sometimes the heroes who change everything never realize they were heroes at all.